Jesus, I would say no doubt lived as a person, but to the extent of what he did, I'm not sure.
If he comes walking into where I work, shows me the signs of the stigmata and tells me he's the son of God, I might start believing.
I don't believe in God, first of all. Maybe because I grew up in like an age of science.
I have a lot of different thoughts and theories on Jesus, but I don't think coming back from the dead's really possible.
Really excited to be here and really excited to talk with you about the resurrection of Jesus. Being that it's Easter month, we need to talk about Jesus. And again, the title of the message is, I am Jesus. So who is Jesus? You know, I know atheists that don't believe anything about Jesus. He was just a man. A lot of people say, well, Jesus was a really good guy. You know, he did good things. He helped the poor. He was a good moral teacher, but that's it. And I think there's a whole group of people that say, I don't know who Jesus is. I guess he's a pretty important guy, but I don't know who he is. And you might have Muslims that will say that Jesus was a prophet of God and he preceded Muhammad, but Muhammad was the ultimate prophet, but Jesus was nothing more. Now, Christians, we make a very radical claim about Jesus. We say not only that Jesus was a prophet, but that Jesus was God incarnate. That God came to earth as a man in Jesus Christ and assumed human flesh. God becoming a man, dying on a cross for our sins and being raised from the dead. Now here's the question that I have for you. You all know, and Pastor David talked about it last week, you know that the resurrection of Jesus is the central linchpin of the Christian faith. In fact, it matters more than anything else, because if it happened, it proves that everything that Jesus said was absolutely, positively true, and that you can trust him. But if it didn't happen, just imagine. Imagine for a second, what if the resurrection never happened? What if it's just a made-up story? What if it's just another religious story that we've made up because, you know what, we're all afraid of death, and it's great to have some God to believe in. It would be awesome to know that there's a loving God out there that cares for me and that I can pray to him and that he's watching over me, and that if and when I die, I have an opportunity to go to heaven, so I'm going to believe in the resurrection. I'm going to believe in Jesus Christ because it makes me feel good. Maybe that's all that it is. And in fact, if Jesus did not rise from the dead, then that is all it is. Now imagine, I've always wanted to be able to take a time machine and like go back to Bible times. So, you know, let's imagine for a second that we as a church, we take a special offering, do a capital campaign, and, you know, we buy a DeLorean. And so we get in our DeLorean, we outfit it with a flux capacitor, and we take our DeLorean and we jump it up to 88.8 miles an hour, and we go back in time. We go back 100, 200 years, 300 years, 2,000 years, all the way to April AD 30, so that we can see the resurrection of Christ happen firsthand. So we take our DeLorean, we pull up next to the tomb. It's about 6:30 in the morning. Hasn't quite, been dawn yet. And they say in the scripture that Jesus rose about dawn sometime around then as the sun was coming up. We go to the tomb. We wait. Dawn comes around. That stone's not rolling anywhere. We wait a little longer. Maybe it was more like 7. Maybe the sun had kind of fully come up. Maybe the Bible writers were just a pinch off. And so we wait a little longer. Nothing happens. Now imagine for a second what that would do to your faith. If you could actually take a time machine back and go back to the time where Jesus risen from the dead and could prove conclusively that it didn't happen, what would that mean for you? It would probably mean that you have a significant amount of doubt now, and you'd be in complete disarray. I know I would be. If the resurrection didn't happen, I would be in disarray, because you know what? The resurrection is the ultimate proof that Jesus is who he said he was. And so people can ask you, how can you say that the Christian faith is right? How can you say that we should follow Jesus? Maybe we should follow ourselves, or maybe we should follow Muhammad. Well, the resurrection is the answer. The resurrection is the ultimate proof that God decisively revealed himself in Jesus of Nazareth. But you know what? If we could see that it didn't happen, we would know that our faith was phony. In fact, let me tell you a story about mine where I kind of experienced this doubt. See, it was my freshman year of college. It was my freshman year of college, and I was in a class. It was Acting 1. Now, I was in theater, and if you know anything about theater and music, it's just a very skeptical environment. The people are very loving. They're very heartwarming, but people kind of have this, I kind of go my own way. I do what I want. Yeah, sure, you can believe in what you believe in, but I'm going to believe in what I believe in, and it's all good. Everything's great. It's a family atmosphere, but there's a lot of skepticism. Not really a whole lot of belief in Jesus Christ. In fact, in the theater department, I was the only person in the entire department that I knew of, and there's hundreds of people that followed Christ. The only person. Now, there are plenty of people that loved Jesus, thought he was great, but they didn't follow him. Not the way I did. They didn't believe in Jesus the way that I believed in Jesus. So I'm sitting in this Acting 1 class, and we all get into a circle. And the professor of the class says, this is what I want you to do. I want you to think of a time in your life when something amazing happened, something that changed you, something that made you just a different person. And so everybody's thinking about that as we're sitting in a circle, and I'm thinking to myself, this would be a great time to share the gospel. Because if there's one person that's changed my life more than anybody, it's Jesus of Nazareth. I know that Jesus has changed me. So when they come around to me, I'm going to talk about Jesus. I'm going to talk about how he's changed my life. I'm going to talk about how he's made a difference in me. I'm going to talk about how my life would never be the same. And I'm going to talk about how he's the way. And if you follow him, you can go to heaven. You can have eternal life. You can have life abundant right now. And so everybody went around the circle, and they kind of gave their stories. And I was towards the end. So I got to hear most people's stories, and it was pretty good. I had a few people that, just told stories about their parents or about some of their friends, just a life-impacting moment. Everybody was very supportive, lots of clapping, there were some tears. And finally, they get to me. I'm nervous, and my heart's beating. I'm thinking, okay, I got to do this right. So I start to talk about Jesus. Start telling them what Jesus has done for me. I start telling them how Jesus can help them. And then I probably made the huge mistake of saying Jesus is the way and the truth. And I basically shared the gospel with them and shared my testimony. Silence. Everybody's looking around. What do we say to this? And I'm kind of just, okay, see how this goes. Somebody's going to get saved, right? Suddenly, they all start pelting me with question after question after question after question. Well, how do you know that the Bible says today what it even said thousands of years ago? Isn't it copies of copies of copies of copies of copies? How do we know it still says today what it did back then? Well, what about science? Hasn't science disproved God? Or maybe the Bible's not even perfect. Or how could somebody really rise from the dead? Or how can you be so arrogant as to say that Jesus is the only way? Maybe there's other ways. Maybe all different faiths are a way to God. Maybe there's no God. And they started asking me all these questions, and I was just sitting there, I had no answer for them at all. And here I was so excited. I thought I was going to change the theater department right there, right now, and I completely and totally bombed. I couldn't answer any of their questions, and so I left completely discouraged. I thought, man, I had my opportunity, and I blew it. But not only did I leave discouraged, I also left with sincere doubt for the first time in my life, because I said, wow, those are good questions. I can't answer those questions. I don't really know if the Bible says today what it did then. I guess I don't really know that Jesus rose from the dead. I feel that God's done something in my heart, and I sense the Holy Spirit in my life, but maybe I have kind of deceived myself. Maybe there's all these doubts. I was very disappointed, and I'm a kind of a naturally skeptical person, and so I've never applied my skepticism to my faith, and I started at that moment, and I was experiencing severe doubt. You know what? I think today the culture is experiencing the same kind of thing. There's a disappointment, not just in the faith, but in life in general. People don't trust institutions. They don't trust a lot of things. For instance, people don't trust the government much anymore. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, a Republican, a socialist, or a libertarian. People just don't have a lot of trust in the government anymore. They don't believe they're really looking out for us. They don't believe they're looking out for our best interests. People, they are very disappointed today in the economy. We're still struggling, trying to come back from that. People are very disappointed in their life prospects, where they're going to go. And people are exceptionally disappointed in religion. They just don't believe anymore. They don't think it matters. They don't think it's true. They don't think it's viable, because there's so many options out there. There's 10,000 different ways to believe, and nobody knows what's true. And you know what? Maybe the church is just after our money. People are disappointed. They're disappointed, and you know what? The answer to all of those questions is the resurrection, because people want something real. I want something real. So you see, when I doubted, I took some time to examine the Christian faith. And I wanted to examine it like a historian would examine it. I wanted to examine it not with this presupposed belief that it was true, but I wanted to dig into it because I was doubting after that college experience I had. Now I'm going to tell you something really cool. What we're going to do today is a little bit different. I'm not going to give you just a plain text and kind of interpret it and talk with you about it and apply it to your life like a typical sermon. You know, where I would give you a text and I would say, hey, this is what this part of the Bible means, and this is how it applies to your life. Go home and live it out and just be a solid Christ follower today. No, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the Bible and we're going to treat it the same way that any other historian would treat an ancient document. So we're going to treat it with no special treatment at all. And I think what you will find, surprisingly, is that the majority of New Testament scholars agree about some very strong basic facts about Jesus of Nazareth and his death and his resurrection. Now let me be clear what I'm saying. I'm not talking about Christian scholars. I'm not talking about conservative scholars and historians. I'm talking about the wide spectrum of New Testament and first century historians. They agree on several basic facts about the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And I think you're going to be surprised at these facts. Now remember, every single statement I'm going to make today is accepted, again, by the wide variety of scholars. That includes Christians and atheists. They will agree with this. If you don't believe me, I'll give you sources afterwards. Come and ask me, and I'll email you some sources to show you that this is true. But let me give you fact number one. Now, you ready for this? Fact number one. Jesus was buried in a tomb by Joseph of Arimathea. I'm going to say it again. Fact number one. Jesus was buried in a tomb by Joseph of Arimathea. Now, I'm going to tell you some of the biggest reasons that scholars think that this is true, that historians say this happened for sure. And it all starts with 1 Corinthians 15, chapters 3 through 5. Now, I'm going to read that to you. Listen to what this says. Oh, I just lost it. For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received. Now, this is Paul talking. That Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, that he appeared to Cephas and then to the 12. Now you might be saying, well, so what? You have a Bible verse that says Jesus was buried. What does it mean? Well, this Bible verse, historians believe, and pretty much all agree on, it's basically a little statement, an early creed of the Christian church. And most historians will trace this back to within 3 years of the death of Jesus Christ. Now, not Christian historians, all historians, to within 3 to 5 years of the death of Jesus. So close to the event of Jesus' death that it's almost certainly not made up, because all of Jesus' enemies are still around. And we know that this was not written by Paul. I'll tell you why it wasn't written by Paul first, that he's copying an old creed. Because he uses words that Paul never uses in any of his other letters. He never calls Peter Cephas. He never refers to the apostles as the 12. And so this is kind of what historians and linguists do to determine when something was written. Let me give you an example. In my English class when I was in college, I was writing a paper, and I like to write, and I was doing really well. You know, I was writing it along, and I thought, man, I need some good material. So I Googled some stuff, and I found a source, and I just found a source that wrote it the perfect way. Just like this paragraph that I thought, this is dynamite. I wrote a 7-page paper. It was all mine. But this one little paragraph was perfect. So I just kind of copied, pasted, stuck it in my paper. I thought I was pretty clever. I wrote it, but just not that paragraph. Well, my English teacher was smarter than I was. And so she Googles pretty much everybody's paper to see if she can find any language that comes up. She found that paragraph and gave me a big fat 0. You see, my English teacher could see what she noticed was in the middle of the paper, she noticed that writing didn't sound like the writing in the rest of my paper. So she could examine it and kind of go, that seems fishy. Let's look if I can find something somewhere. And so she knew that I didn't write that. And it's kind of the same thing that historians do. They say, this is not the kind of writing that Paul writes. So Paul was taking an old creed and he was using it. So that's kind of the strongest evidence that people know Jesus was buried in a tomb by Joseph of Arimathea. Another evidence is that the biggest one is that Joseph of Arimathea is not likely to be a Christian invention. What I mean by that is they didn't make him up, because Joseph of Arimathea was a Pharisee. Now that was like the enemies of Jesus Christ, the people that killed him, that crucified him. Now, Christians are not going to make up that a Pharisee came and gave Jesus an honorable burial. What you're supposed to do with criminals is throw them into a common grave with 20 other criminals and just throw dirt on top of them. Putting them in a stone tomb was where a rich person would be buried. People don't do that. It's an honorable, good burial. And a Pharisee would never do that. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense that a Pharisee would do that. So Christians wouldn't make it up. If somebody was going to take Jesus and put him in a tomb, he would have been one of the disciples or one of his followers, not a hated Pharisee. It would kind of be like, how many of you know who Bill Maher is? He does a late night talk show and he's like a total atheist, and he's a comedian and a total atheist. He just rips on the Christian faith all the time in his show because he's an atheist. He thinks it's stupid. And that would be like Bill Maher burying Fred Phelps in his personal grave. Now, if you don't know who Fred Phelps is, he's the founder of the Westboro Baptist Church. They're those guys that go around and they go to funerals of like dead soldiers and they say, thank God for dead soldiers, and God hates fags and things like that. They just say very mean things. They do things that I don't think are consistent with the Christian faith at all. Now, Bill Maher, somebody like Bill Maher would hate Fred Phelps. Now, Fred Phelps died just a few weeks ago, and that would be like Bill Maher burying Fred Phelps and giving him an honorable burial. Nobody would make that story up unless it were actually true. So because of those reasons, and a couple more that I'm not going to get into, almost all historians agree that Jesus was buried in a tomb by Joseph of Arimathea. But this is gonna be crazy. Fact number 2, moving on. Jesus' tomb was discovered empty. Now, part of the evidence for this is, again, it's mentioned in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 3 through 5. Another evidence for this is that this material, that Jesus' tomb was found empty, is in some of the earliest sources. Now, you might not know this, but Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they didn't just sit down and write their gospel. They did write it, but they also used earlier sources. In fact, the Gospels even say that they use sources. Some of the writers say, hey, I went and talked to eyewitnesses. I got some sources from other people, and I wrote this down. And so some of the earliest sources that scholars have traced this back to the earliest material. And you kind of get it. The earlier something is, the more likely it is to be true. The more years that go by, the more time that you have to create a legend and embellish the story. But this goes back to really close to within time of Jesus died, at the same time that Jesus' enemies were around. So people believe that the tomb was found empty. Another reason, and this is a one, and I want to see if you get it. We have records of the back and forth between Jews and Christians where they argue about Jesus. We have historical records of this. And this is what the Christians say. Jesus has risen. And then the Jewish community would say, no, the disciples stole the body. And then the Christians would say, well, what about the guards at the empty tomb? And they would say, well, they paid them to not say anything. Now listen to what I just said. Jesus has risen. No, the disciples stole the body. Well, what about the guards at the tomb? Well, they fell asleep. If Jesus' tomb was not empty, this is how the conversation would have gone. Because everybody knew where his tomb was. It was in Jerusalem. This is the conversation. Jesus has risen. No, he hasn't. He's still in the tomb. So that's how it would go. You see, what would the Pharisees do if Jesus' tomb was not empty? They would have pulled his body out and shown it to everybody and put it on public display and said, hey, here it is. Here's the body of Jesus. There's no empty tomb, and it would die just like all the other messianic claims before Jesus. The Pharisees didn't do that. In fact, in their letters, they basically admitted that there was an empty tomb. The disciples stole the body. They would have never said that if there wasn't really an empty tomb. So there was an empty tomb, but let me give you the biggest fact of why historians believe that there really was an empty tomb. It's because the tomb was discovered by women. Now, you might be thinking, what do you mean? Let me give you a little background here. In the first century, women's testimony was regarded as worthless. In fact, if two women, usually they required two witnesses. If two women were to witness a murder, and they would have said to the judge or somebody, hey, we saw this guy murdered, it wouldn't have mattered because there was no male testimony. Women's testimony was considered worthless. They were like second-class citizens. In fact, there's an old saying back in the first century. This is what they would say. They say, let the law of God be burned before it's placed into the hands of a woman. I'm getting some dirty looks. Glad my wife's not in here. Now, I'm just the messenger. I'm just the messenger. I'm just explaining to you how they felt, not how I felt. So anyway, back then, that's what they believed. And so here's the deal. All four Gospels are unanimous that a group of Jesus' women followers went and found the tomb. Now, this is why it's the biggest reason. If people did not find the empty tomb, if that story was false, they would have never used women in the story. They would have used Peter or John or one of the big disciples. But because they used women, that's the most convincing piece of evidence that the tomb was actually empty. And so because of that fact, more than any others, scholars today agree that Jesus' tomb was found empty. And so let me move on to fact number 3. And this one's going to blow your mind. You're not going to believe that most scholars accept this. Fact number 3. People experienced Jesus alive from the dead. I'm going to say that again because it's going to blow your minds. This is agreed upon by scholars. Atheist scholars. People experienced, I'll say it this way, people experienced appearances of Jesus alive from the dead. Again, this is found in early material, early sources. This is a recording. It's found in early material. You're going to find that all the time. You're going to find in the Bible, Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 5 through 7, he said, hey, a bunch of people saw it. In fact, one time, 500 people saw Jesus at once. And you know what? If you don't believe me, I'll give you their names. You can go check it out because some of them are still alive. Paul probably wouldn't have said that if it didn't happen. We have multiple sources that tell us about this. And here's the cool thing. These appearances happen to multiple people. They happen to women. They happen to Jesus' disciples. They happen to allegedly 500 people at once, some of whom are still alive. And Paul was so confident in that he told people to go talk to them and check it out. But also, some of the appearances came to people that were completely and totally unlikely. Paul experienced the risen Jesus. Paul was a Pharisee, hated Jesus. He went around killing Christians. He couldn't stand the Christian faith. And then suddenly, Paul comes to believe in Jesus Christ. This is a historical fact that Paul was a Pharisee and was persecuting, throwing Christians in prison, and even having some of them murdered. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, Paul becomes a Christian. And in Paul's letters, he doesn't say it was because he read the Bible and came to believe. He says it was because I saw Jesus. I didn't just hear the gospel. I actually saw him risen from the dead. Now, Paul's not the type of person that's going to make up this vision and just kind of come to believe it because he's sad. No reason to believe it. How about James, the brother of Jesus? Think about this. What would it take for you to believe that your brother is God? In fact, we know historically that James did not believe. That's a historical fact. James did not believe in Jesus. And later on, James comes to believe that Jesus rose from the dead and that he becomes the head of the Jerusalem church. The central church in the entire region. He becomes the head of it. He goes from a total skeptic and Jesus' brother, for crying out loud. Could you imagine the pressure of being Jesus' brother? Like, James lies, one time, and Mary comes up to him and is like, hey, James, you shouldn't lie. And James is like, come on, Mom, get off me. Everybody lies. Jesus doesn't. It's pressure to be Jesus' brother. You're not going to come to believe that your brother is the Son of God. But he did. He believed that Jesus rose from the dead, even though he was a skeptic before and didn't believe at all. So because of those things, in fact, I'll tell you, you won't even believe this. It's over 99% of New Testament scholars and historians believe that people experienced appearances of Jesus alive from the dead. Over 99%. So fact number 4, this is our last fact. The disciples had no reason to believe in Jesus' resurrection, but they did. No reason at all to believe in the resurrection of Jesus, but they did. Think about it. Their leader was dead. And not only that, he died a cursed criminal. Now, there was no conception or understanding of this back in first century culture. There was no idea in any Jew's mind. We have nothing that gives us this idea that there was going to be a dying Messiah that would then rise from the dead. In fact, the belief back then, and it says it in the Old Testament scriptures, is that if you were hung on a tree, you were cursed by God. So when Jesus died on that cross, all the disciples ran away. You want to know why? Because they were frightened, they were scared, and because in their minds, Jesus was now cursed. This whole time that they were following Jesus for 3 years, watching him do these miracles, and now he's being killed by his enemies. In their mind, the Messiah was supposed to rise up and destroy Rome and bring Israel back to prominence, not die a criminal's death. In their minds, the Pharisees were now right, and they were wrong the whole time. Not only was Jesus a fraud, he was cursed. But within just a couple of years after Jesus' death, the Christian faith has spread all over Jerusalem. And these same disciples that were running and fleeing and denied Jesus are now proclaiming that he rose from the dead. Not something they believe, but they're saying, we actually saw him. In fact, you can read it in the Bible. They say, we are witnesses. Say, we're not following clever stories. It's not stories that we made up. We were actually witnesses. We actually physically saw the risen Jesus after he died. We saw him. And those disciples were so committed and so believed in Jesus' resurrection that they were willing to die for their beliefs. Now you might say, well, wait a minute. Muslims have died for their beliefs. Think about 9/11. You might say, well, Mormons have died for their beliefs. Other people have died for their beliefs, but wait. See, Muslims and Mormons and other people that have died, they're dying for something that they believe in their heart to be true. The disciples were in a unique position to know whether Jesus had risen or not. And every single one of them, exception of John, as far as we know, were martyred and killed because they saw him. They were so convinced that it was true. Now, nobody dies for something they know is not true. Maybe you could find one really hardcore disciple, but you're not going to find every single disciple. If they're going to be choosing between Jesus and death, if they knew that Jesus hadn't really risen, some of them at least would have said, okay, we didn't really see it. It didn't really happen. But no, they all said, no, we saw Jesus and we stand on that belief. We saw him rise from the dead. We are witnesses of it. And so because of those pieces of evidence, most scholars today believe that people had appearances of Jesus. Now, here's the thing. When you look at these several facts, let me say all 4 facts again because I want you to hear them. Fact number 1, Jesus was buried in a tomb by Joseph of Arimathea. Fact number 2, Jesus' tomb was found empty. Fact number 3, people experienced appearances of Jesus alive from the dead. Fact number 4, the disciples had no reason to believe in Jesus' resurrection, but they did anyway. Now, when you look at all 4 of those facts, and now remember, I'm not appealing to anything Christian here. I'm appealing to beliefs that the majority of New Testament historians and scholars, including atheists, believe. When you look at all 4 of those facts, you got to say to yourself, what is the best explanation of those 4 facts? Now, I think that the best explanation is the same explanation that the disciples gave. That Jesus of Nazareth did, in fact, rise from the dead. Now, let me give you an example. This is how a historian, I'm going to give you some criteria. This is how historians will determine what the best explanation of a set of facts are. There's a few things. One of them is scope. In other words, does it explain all of the facts? For instance, if you have 2 or 3 hypotheses, the more facts that hypothesis can explain, the better. Another criteria is power. How well can it explain the facts? You go outside and the sidewalk is wet. Maybe it's because a random kid came into your yard and poured buckets of water on your sidewalk. Well, it could be that it rained. And raining might be a more powerful explanation because it's just probably a little more likely. Another one is plausibility. Is it a reasonable claim? Well, in light of the fact that Jesus did miracles and made these radical claims about himself, yes, I think it becomes reasonable. It's not contrived. In other words, you don't have to make up a bunch of additional stuff to make it work. Well, no. All you really have to do to believe in Jesus' resurrection is to believe that God exists. If you believe that God exists, then it's certainly possible that he could have risen from the dead. And lastly, is it better than other explanations? Now, what I've done so far is I've given you the case for Jesus' resurrection. Kind of like a lawyer would. I've made a case. I've laid out the evidence, and I've said the best explanation is that Jesus of Nazareth really did rise from the dead. Now, it's time for the defense attorney to speak. So, I'm the prosecutor. I'm laying out the case. Well, let's let the defense attorney speak a little bit. Maybe he's going to say, okay, we'll agree with those set of facts, but I have an alternate interpretation. There have been other explanations of what happened to Jesus. Now, I'm going to give you a few of those. Here's one. The first one is the one that the early Jews gave. The disciples stole the body. That's what the early Jews said. The disciples stole the body. In fact, if you read the Gospel of Matthew, he'll tell you about it. He'll say, the Jews said that the disciples stole the body, and he'll say, and to this day, they're still saying that. Now, I'll tell you why that can't work. Nobody doubts the disciples' sincerity. No scholars believe that they were lying. The reason is they died for what they believed. They were in a unique position to know. And also, because we know the tomb was empty, if the disciples stole the body, it's just completely unlikely that the disciples would have stolen the body and perpetrated some lie. Not if they were willing to die for their faith. Everybody today believes in their sincerity. And certainly if the disciples stole the body, people like James and Paul would not have come to faith in Jesus Christ. And so today, nobody believes that the disciples stole the body anymore. That's a theory that nobody accepts anymore. Here's one that was popular in the 1800s. The swoon theory. I bet you some of you have actually heard this one before. This is the theory that what happened to Jesus when he was on the cross was that, yes, he was nailed to the cross, he hung there, but they just thought he was dead. He really just kind of fainted. He passed out from exhaustion. They took him down from the cross and they put him in the tomb. And then he revived in the tomb a few days later and he came out. Let me tell you why nobody believes this anymore. Number one, it's really possible to survive crucifixion. Crucifixion was a gruesome, horrifying process where you would be flogged until your skin was falling off and you would be nailed to a cross and left to hang there for usually 2 or 3 days. And another reason is Roman soldiers are not letting you get off that cross alive, because if they let you get off that cross alive, they will be crucified themselves. They will be killed. That's what Rome was like. If you messed up, you died. So Roman soldiers made sure they were really good at knowing whether people were dead. Now here's the biggest one. Let's imagine, though, beyond all the evidence, let's imagine that somehow, despite how horrible the crucifixion was, that Jesus survived. Let's imagine that despite the crazy idea that he could just lay in the tomb for 3 days and revive and somehow push away the stone, even though he was almost dead, let's suppose that somehow Jesus did it. Somehow he made it with all of his sores and all of his wounds, and he comes out of the grave. He would be crawling out, almost half dead. The disciples would not be declaring that Jesus is the risen Lord that defeated death and the grave and sickness and disease and the powers of hell. They would be nursing him back to health. They would be feeling sorry for him. And so because of all those facts, nobody believes in the swoon theory anymore. Here's one, not popular anymore, the hallucination theory. Well, you know what happened? All those people, they saw hallucinations. Well, here's the problem with that. First of all, you got James and Paul. Not likely candidates to hallucinate Jesus. Second of all, you just have too many people that saw Jesus. Third of all, hallucinations are questioned by people that hallucinate. Most of the time, hallucinations are induced by drugs. But to have everybody, all of Jesus' disciples, hallucinated him, every single one of them, that's pretty unlikely. People don't group hallucinate the same thing. And even if they do, there's always people that question the hallucinations. Nobody was questioning that they saw Jesus. And so today, nobody believes in the hallucination theory. In fact, you want to know what today the popular theory is about what happened to Jesus? We don't know. We don't know what happened to Jesus. In fact, I watched a debate once between my favorite historian and scholar, William Lane Craig, and another guy. And this guy was an atheist, but he was a PhD, and his dissertation was on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, this PhD atheist agreed with all four of those facts. I agree with the empty tomb. Jesus was buried in a tomb, that the tomb was empty, the disciples believed in him, and they shouldn't have. I agreed with that. But he said, you know what? Here's my explanation. This was his real explanation. Jesus had a secret twin brother. And after the crucifixion, he came into town and people mistook him for Jesus Christ. That was his explanation. PhD. So an incredibly smart, intelligent person wrote a 300-page PhD, and his theory was that Jesus had a secret twin brother that came into place and into town whenever Jesus died. Now, I hope that you can see, I don't have to give any reasons why you don't believe that. I don't think anybody in here probably agrees with that or even thinks that that's reasonable. But that's the state of scholarship right now. Those facts are so strongly considered to be true that people have no explanation that's reasonable. In fact, today, what people will say is, well, it's just one of history's mysteries. You know, we have these facts. We really don't know how to explain them. But, you know, crazy, unexplainable things happen all the time. There's UFO stories. Most of them are not credible, but there's a small percentage that are credible. Or ghost stories. There's all sorts of stories where we can't completely explain everything. Well, you know what? If it was just some random guy that rose from the dead, I could maybe agree with that. I could say, okay, maybe it's just one of history's mysteries. It's just some random guy. But it's not a random guy. It was Jesus. Jesus came on the scene, and this is agreed upon by scholars, with an unprecedented sense of divine authority. Jesus made radical claims that I am the way, I am the truth, I am the light. No man comes to God but by me. He said, I am the bread of life. He said, I bring forgiveness, that apart from me, you cannot know God. Basically, Jesus came on the scene and even did miracles. We have writings from Jesus' enemies saying that, yeah, he did miracles, but it was just the devil or something like that. So we have his enemies even admitting that he did miracles. So you have a guy that comes on the scene, says basically, I'm God in the flesh. He does miracles. He teaches like no one has ever taught before. And then add those four facts into it, and you don't have a history's mystery. You have the resurrection of Jesus. Now let me tell you something. If you're a skeptic in here, or maybe you've been doubting your faith, maybe you've been saying, man, I believe, but sometimes I just feel like it's a fairy tale. I don't know if it's true. You can have confidence that it really did happen. It's not just a story. It's not just something you believe in your heart and I just have faith in it. Now, other faiths, that's what it is. You just believe or you don't believe. But there is historical evidence behind the Christian faith, and there's good historical reasons to believe that Jesus did in fact rise from the dead. And if Jesus rose from the dead, this is what it means. It means that everything that he said is true. And it means that you can trust him. And it means that if you haven't been taking Jesus seriously, you need to start. Because he rose from the dead. He means he's the Lord of life. He's the Lord of history. Let me tell you what the resurrection means for you. It means there's life after death. Jesus proved that there's life after death by his resurrection. He proved that there's something beyond the grave. And he gives you two choices. You can follow him and receive eternal life, or you can choose to reject him and receive eternal death. Now, I know that sounds harsh, but it's the truth. It's the truth. It's not very popular to say that anymore, but it's the truth. And you need to know the truth. You can't make a decision if you don't know the truth. Jesus said that. You want to know what Jesus also, I'll tell you what it also means. It means you can have purpose and meaning in this life. See, because Jesus rose from the dead, I know that there's a God that loves me. I know that there's a God that loves you. I know that there's a God that sees your suffering, sees your hurts, cares about you, and wants you to know him. Because Jesus rose, I know that this isn't just a random earth that came about by accident, but that it has purpose and meaning, and that my life has a purpose, and that's to know God and to enjoy him forever, to experience him every day and receive the peace and the joy and the love that comes with knowing Christ. Because of Jesus' resurrection, you can have purpose, even in the bleakest of circumstances, because no matter how horrible life gets, Jesus still rose from the dead. You can have victory in your life. Jesus defeated all the forces of evil when he rose from the dead. He defeated death when he rose from the dead. He defeated sickness and disease when he rose from the dead. He defeated the power of racism when he upheld Gentiles. He defeated the power of sexism when he gave value to women in the first century when nobody treated them as anything. Jesus gives value. He gives victory over all the powers of the demonic, over all the powers of hell, over death in your life. You can have forgiveness in Jesus. So you can trust him because he rose from the dead. You can trust him. See, when Jesus died on that cross, he took all the sins of the world right upon himself. And then he proved he was stronger than it by defeating death, by raising from the dead. You can trust him. You can also have hope. There is hope in the resurrection of Jesus. See, earlier I talked about how a lot of people are disappointed. We're disappointed in so many things. We're disappointed in the government. You know, a lot of people. I said, no matter what your political affiliation, so many people are just disappointed. But you know what? Because of the resurrection, I know that one day Jesus is coming back and he's going to be the government and he's going to rule. And it's not going to be a government where people abuse their power, where presidents and kings and politicians that make promises of one thing and then change their mind and directly lie to your face, and then they steal money or they get involved in sex scandals and you can't trust them because of what they do. You can always trust Jesus. Jesus will never abuse his power. In fact, Jesus is the only person I know. He had all authority in the world and he came under everybody else through the cross. He came with servant leadership. And unlike the government of this world that seeks to have power over people, Jesus came to serve. And because of his resurrection, you can trust that one day there will be a government that's much better than any government that we've ever had. Then the economy is down. We're still trying to recover. People are disappointed in their wallet. But you know what? When you come to know Christ through his resurrection, you begin to see life through a different lens. And you realize, you know what? That my life's value doesn't come from having stuff and having money and having a big car and a big house and having a nicer car than my neighbor has. It comes through knowing God through Jesus Christ. A lot of people are disappointed in life. But you know what? When you know Christ, life couldn't be any better. Because no matter how bad it gets, you have God. And knowing God, the most beautiful, wonderful, intelligent, powerful being in the world, there's nothing that compares to that. You see, if you don't know Christ, this is the best life we'll ever get. But if you know Jesus, this is the worst life will ever be. All you have is just to look forward to something better and better and better. You know what? We're just tired of religion. We're tired of it. People don't believe in it anymore. But you know what? Because of the resurrection of Christ, I realized something. I don't follow a religion. I follow a person. I don't follow some set of rules or some set of creeds. I don't follow the Muslim religion or the Buddhist religion. I don't even follow the Christian religion. I follow Jesus Christ. You see, you don't have to believe in religion when you come to Jesus. You just believe in Jesus. And then he changes you from the inside out. The last thing that you can have is you can know Jesus Christ today. And I don't know if you're in here and you say, you know what? I don't know Jesus Christ. I believe I might have even some kind of faith, but I don't know the Jesus you're talking about. Maybe I come to church, I even raise my hands during songs, I sing, I might read my Bible, I might even pray, but I just don't know what you're talking about. I don't know Jesus in a personal way, the way that you describe. Well, you can know him today. You can know Jesus. All you have to do is turn from sin and turn to Christ. That's it. You say, I'm not following my way anymore. I'm following Jesus. That is it. And you can have everything that I listed just a couple minutes ago, all of it. Today, if you've been struggling with doubt, it might be emotional doubt, it might be intellectual doubt, I hope that today that you know that you can trust Jesus Christ. And that the resurrection is reality. So today, as you leave with confidence. Leave knowing that Jesus has defeated death and defeated sin. Leave knowing that I can walk out this door with my chest up, with a smile on my face, my head held high, not because of anything I've done, but because of what Jesus Christ has done. I have victory every single day of my life.